Why do some watches cost tens of thousands of dollars and other watches cost hundreds of dollars? You can take two watches that seem to have similar specifications. They might both have automatic movements, sapphire crystals, good water resistance, and yet one of them could cost $20,000 and one of them could cost $200. Is one really 100 times better than the other? I've been running this channel for about 5 years now, and in that time, I've gotten my hands on a lot of different watches to review, so I think I'm finally ready to at least take a stab at answering that question. Now, this video is sponsored by Daily Watch. They sell high quality and very unique watch accessories. They sent me a couple of these to check out. Look at that, pretty cool, huh? More on that later in the video. Today, I've picked two watches from my collection that on the surface look very similar, but one costs $300 and one costs $1,500. Take a look, and then after that, I'll tell you exactly what separates these two watches from each other. Hey guys, welcome back to Just the Watch. My name's Dave, I live in Japan, and I love to collect affordable watches. And today we're going to be addressing a question that I've had on my mind for a while, and hopefully we'll be able to get a little bit of clarity if this is something that you've been wondering about. Hopefully this will help you, particularly as you're trying to figure out, is it worth it to save up and buy a more expensive watch? But I'm going to break this down into 4 sections, 4 angles that we're going to analyze these watches from and compare them and see if we can tease out what some of those differences are. And those 4 things that we're going to look at are the cost of the components of the watch, the quality of the build on the watch, the design of the watch, and the reputation of the brand behind it. And I think by understanding those 4 categories, we'll be able to get a better grasp of why some watches cost thousands of dollars and other watches cost hundreds of dollars. But first, let's check out the specifications on these two watches and get a quick overview of what we're going to be comparing throughout the rest of the video. So in our affordable category, we have a watch from Spinnaker that retails for around $300. This is the Spinnaker Fleuss. It features an automatic movement, a sapphire crystal, a leather band, 150 meters of water resistance, rotating bezel, and it has loomed hands and markers on the dial. It's modeled after a vintage dive watch, but it's definitely on the large side for a vintage dive watch. Spinnaker has beefed the case size up to 43 millimeters to kind of fit the modern trends. And overall, I really like this watch. It's got a great combination of features, it's got a good look, and it has a pretty fair price for everything that it's offering. Spinnaker is a little bit of a newer brand. I think they've definitely outgrown the micro brand label, and at the present they've built up a pretty good reputation of making high quality, nice looking watches at an affordable price. If your budget for an automatic watch is around $300 and you like this vintage look, I think it's a great option. Now on the other side of things, we have a collaboration between Squale and their Korean distributor Whatawatches. Together, they produced this special edition watch that is based on one of Squale's own vintage designs. Squale has a long and storied history in the dive watch world. They were one of the pioneers for watches that had high water resistance ratings back in the 60s, 70s, and they produced cases for major luxury brands like Blancpain. This watch features an incredible attention to detail, and it's powered by the much more expensive ETA 2824 Swiss automatic movement. Now, this watch is modeled very much on a watch that Squale currently offers, but in this collaboration, Whatawatches has really gone to a lot of efforts to source a lot of very particular parts for this watch to really give it that vintage feel. Everything from the strap to the buckle on the strap to even the spring bars has been very carefully selected. The result is beautiful, historic, and just an all-around great watch for around $1,500. Okay, so now that you've seen the two watches, the first thing that we're going to take a look at is the cost of the components that went into them, and hopefully start to see some of the differences between a $300 watch and a $1,500 watch. But before we do, let me show you the watch mats and the watch trays that Daily Watch sent over to me. These are things that I saw advertisements for, and I thought they were really cool, especially as a watch content creator where I'm often having to show watches and film them. I thought they would just make great little platforms to kind of show off the different angles of a watch. But in addition to that, I've found it just to be really helpful to have a dedicated spot on my desk where I can take the watch that I'm wearing off and have a safe spot to put it down. You're getting the choice of either a wooden or metal base here that has a nice amount of heft to it and really creates a very stable platform to put watches on. And both the small round mats and the large rectangular tray make excellent platforms to do strap changes or just to have a safe, dedicated place to put your watches down where they won't get knocked around or get scratches. Now, the materials used and the craftsmanship put into here are both outstanding. These are products that are probably geared more towards people who have luxury watches. And I have really been enjoying using them over the past couple weeks since I've had them here. If you're interested in checking these products out, I'll leave a link to Daily Watch down below in the description of this video. Big thanks to them for sponsoring this video by giving me these products to show to you. But with that out of the way, let's get back into our comparison of the two watches and look at the quality of components that go into a $300 Spinnaker versus a $1,500 Squale. So first, when we're talking about cost, let's start with the movement inside of this watch because that's one of the most obvious ones. Neither Spinnaker nor Squale build their own movements. Both of them source movements from other manufacturers, but they went in two very different directions in doing so. Spinnaker has the very reliable and very affordable Seiko NH35. This is one of the most common watch movements you're going to find in affordable watches. It's a movement that will last forever and not give you any problems. Accuracy is okay, but nothing special. And it features a very standard 26,500 beats per hour or 6 ticks per second beat rate. Now, I'm sure wholesale costs are going to vary a lot, but you can find these movements online for around $50. On the other hand, Whatawatches actually went to some pretty great lengths to source the ETA 2824, which is a movement that's kind of hard to get your hands on because they almost exclusively go into watches by the Swatch Group now who owns ETA. More commonly, you're going to find the Sellita SW200, which is essentially the exact same movement but made by a different manufacturer. The ETA 2824 is a higher quality movement. It features greater accuracy and a smoother beat rate. It is a movement that's made in Switzerland as opposed to the NH35, which is made in Japan, and it is commonly found in watches in this between $1,000 and $2,000 price range. And again, looking around at prices online, I'm finding the ETA 2824 for around $250, or roughly about 5 times the cost of the Seiko NH35 that's inside the Spinnaker. I think one of the big differences between these two movements is that you're probably going to be more likely to replace the Seiko NH35 because it's so cheap, whereas the ETA 2824, you're more likely to actually get it serviced. The NH35 is just so cheap and so easily available that it's much easier and cheaper just to replace the whole movement rather than to actually service it or fix it years down the road when it's going to need that servicing, because all automatic movements will eventually need a kind of a tune-up. Whereas the ETA 2824, being a more expensive, high-quality movement, is one that you're probably going to be more likely to actually get fixed and serviced and then continue using it. Now, if keeping costs low is a high value of yours, the Seiko NH35 is great because it's going to be very affordable to maintain. But if you have that kind of romantic connection to the movement in the watch, which really is the heart of the watch, the core part of it that's functioning, if you want to maintain that over the course of the life of the watch and potentially pass it down to someone special in your life, you might prefer to keep the movement intact and keep that movement with the watch rather than just replacing the whole thing when it's not really necessary. And I think this is definitely something that you want when you're looking at spending more money on a watch. When you get to something that's going to be costing you around $1,500, it's probably something that you're going to be more invested in and really wanting to keep long term. Another very obvious difference between these two watches is the strap that is included. The Spinnaker comes with a decent quality, water-resistant leather strap. It's kind of a thick, padded strap that does okay in the water. This is the kind of strap you'd probably wind up spending about $30 on if you needed to replace it. And it's an okay strap, but it's not anything particularly special. The Spinnaker, on the other hand, did go with something special. They've got a Horween cordovan strap. This is made of premium leather, and everything about it is incredibly high quality. The strap alone retails for around $100, so there's a very noticeable difference there. The final thing to note on the cost of components is that the Spinnaker has a fairly uninteresting flat sapphire crystal, whereas the Squale has a very beautiful double-domed sapphire crystal that gives the watch a real vintage air. Now, these are some of the most obvious cost differences when it comes to the components that have gone into these watches. There's going to be obviously more cost differences when we start to look at the build of the watch, because I think it's also very clear that Squale has spent a lot more on manufacturing than Spinnaker has. Okay, the second category that we're going to check out is the build quality between these two watches. Okay, probably the most significant cost difference in manufacturing is going to come from the location of manufacturing. The Spinnaker watch is manufactured in China, whereas the one from Squale is manufactured in Switzerland. Now, particularly when you're talking about a budget watch in the $300 price range like this Spinnaker, the manufacturing that you're going to get from China is going to be good, but it's definitely going to be a mass-produced product without a lot of individual care going into it. And I think there's a noticeably better level of polish and fit and finish from this watch from Squale, which is, on top of being manufactured in Switzerland, also a limited edition. And just the cost of labor between manufacturing a watch in Switzerland versus China is going to account for a significant amount of the cost differences in these two watches. And I think you can see this on a number of places. One is going to be the finishing. The finishing on the Spinnaker is nice, but not exactly impressive. It does feature some brushing and polished edges, and my shots here probably aren't the best representation because this is a watch that I've owned for a while, but it also kind of gives you an idea of how the finishing will hold up. Everything kind of seems a little bit softer and fuzzier, whereas the Squale, on the other hand, has gone for a full polished look, which is kind of an odd choice for a tool watch, but the polishing is done to a very high standard, and the surfaces of the watch come away looking noticeably better than the Spinnaker. The bezel action on the Spinnaker is good, but the bezel action on the Squale is better. The bezel action on the Squale just has a more pleasant feel to it. It operates very smoothly with just the right amount of resistance, and it's very easy to grip. The coin edging on the bezel is very sharply done, but not to the point where it feels uncomfortable at all. It just gives you exactly the right amount of grip that you need. The bezel on the Spinnaker is also nice. It's a little bit chunkier, but the grip is softer and it's not quite as easy to get a hold of. These are admittedly minor things, but they are noticeable. One thing that is more important is the water resistance. The Spinnaker has 150 meters of water resistance versus the 300 meters of water resistance on the Squale. Now, this is an area that the Spinnaker is admittedly a bit underpowered. You can find other $300 dive watches that have 200 meters of water resistance pretty easily, but it does show a difference in engineering here. The Squale features double the water resistance of the Spinnaker and a sapphire crystal that's domed and rises above the bezel. And despite that, its overall thickness is only 12 millimeters compared to the 13 on the Spinnaker. Finally, the quality of the loom is significantly better on the Squale than on the Spinnaker. Now, both of these are trying to go for a vintage aesthetic, so they've gone for that kind of old radium look on the loom, which always results in a lower powered loom than if you'd gone with the full powered C3 kind of greenish tinged loom. Instead, you have a really classic looking kind of faded brown look to the indexes and handsets on both of these dials. And despite the fact that the Spinnaker has gone with applied markers, which typically allow you to make brighter indexes, the brightness on the Squale is significantly better than on the Spinnaker. And in fact, for a watch that features this kind of patinaed brown look on the dials and hands, it has excellent loom. Again, it's not going to stand up to your more high-powered practical dive watches, but for a watch in this style with that look, it is very good. So I think overall you can see a clear advantage in the quality of the manufacturing and the quality of the overall build in the Squale versus the Spinnaker. This is kind of a difficult thing to price, and I don't have any insider information regarding the manufacturing costs of these two watches, but the Squale is a noticeably higher quality watch. Okay, the next category we're going to check out is design. It may seem like it's not that big of a deal given that both of these watches are essentially homages of the Blancpain 50 Fathoms. But that said, there are some very distinct design choices between these two watches, particularly when it comes to the case design, which is something that Squale is famous for. So Squale is known for their case design. In fact, before they were a watch manufacturer, they were a case manufacturer. And back in the 60s, the case design was a huge thing when it came to a dive watch. And in fact, it was common for watch manufacturers to hire an outside company to build the cases for their watches, and then they would fill it with the movements and dial and style that they wanted to sell the final product. And going back for the last 60, 70 years, Squale has been creating some of the best cases for dive watches around. And that's one of the most noticeable differences between these two watches. The case design for the Squale is very elegant with a very unique style and design that harkens back to the vintage Squale dive watch cases of the 1960s. It's also very slim, and yet it manages to maintain a full 300 meters of water resistance, which is very impressive from an engineering standpoint. It has a very unique profile with beautiful curves to it and swooping lugs that make it really stand out both visually and functionally. The case on the Spinnaker, on the other hand, is okay. It's a very standard, pretty generic case. You would find examples of cases looking very similar to this on hundreds of other watches. And that's because the case is something that not a lot of people really pay attention to. As long as the case is comfortable and the looks aren't distracting, most people are going to be happy with it, and that's really what Spinnaker has gone for here. And I do suspect that this is probably a mass-produced case that is either identical or very similar to cases found on other watches, which is going to make it more easy for it to be manufactured in China, because case manufacturers there can just sell the same case or very similar cases to a lot of different brands. But the case on the Squale can only be found on this Squale watch. It's actually a case that was only recently rediscovered by Squale in their archives, and then they modernized it and created a new version for the present. Now, when it comes to the other design elements of this watch, particularly the visual design elements like the dial, bezel, and handset, we're kind of in interesting territory here because both of these watches are homages to vintage Blancpain 50 Fathoms watches. So normally design-wise, I'd call this a tie. You might argue about which one did a better execution, which I think would go to the Squale in that case. But there's another angle here, which is going to tie more into the brand reputation we'll talk about in a second, but that's that Squale actually did manufacture watch cases for Blancpain. They never made one in this exact style, but the fact that the two companies have a connection, I think gives Squale a little bit more claim to these vintage styles because their history is tied to the brand that they're homaging. So while Spinnaker is obviously trying to capitalize on this vintage Blancpain design, by creating an affordable modern alternative to it, the choice to base this design on this classic Blancpain 50 Fathoms watch is a deliberate callback to Squale's own history in watchmaking. So I think in the case of the Squale, that design choice actually adds to the value of the watch. Finally, we're going to compare the brand reputation of these two watches, and that's important for a number of reasons. It's not purely just about perception and name recognition. Part of the reputation of a brand is its track record. Is this a company that has proven that it can make high quality watches? Is it a company that has proven that it will be around for a long time to service your watches and to help support you in the future? Or is this a brand that's going to just kind of disappear and then once they're gone, you're on your own for taking care of it? So when you're comparing costs, you really have to consider that angle as well. Many people seem to believe that having a recognizable brand name on your watch confers some kind of status. I don't want to get into that, but I think there are some tangible benefits to a reputation. If a watch brand has been in business for a long time, it generally means that they know what they're doing. If you build watches that cost a lot of money and break easily, you're going to go out of business. If you build watches that don't have interesting or appealing designs, no one's going to buy them and you're going to go out of business. So a brand that has been around and established a reputation for making high quality watches that are going to last, that are going to be able to withstand the extreme environments that they're meant for in the case of a dive watch, a brand that has iconic designs in their past that they can rely on to bring forward into the future and into modern interpretations. A brand like that is more likely to produce a higher quality watch and more likely to be able to support you if you need help with the watch sometime down the road. And in explaining that, I pretty much also explained the difference between Squale and Spinnaker. Spinnaker is a great brand when it comes to affordable watches, but they are an affordable watch brand. If I'm not mistaken, Spinnaker has been producing watches for around 10 years, while Squale has been at it for more than 60. And in those 60 years, Squale has developed a reputation for producing some of the best waterproof watch cases on the market. In terms of performance and build quality as a tool watch, as a dive watch, I get the sense that they compete with luxury watches from brands like Omega and Rolex. Now, compared to those much more expensive luxury watches, Squale is offering you a lower level of finishing and off-the-shelf movement and nowhere near the level of prestige. But in an odd way, it gives them the ability to make the case for being an incredibly good value, even at $1,500. Now, Spinnaker is kind of interesting in that they really lean on history, but none of the history is their own. Their most popular watches are inspired by vintage watch designs, but those aren't designs that Spinnaker had any hand in developing. They reach back into history and produce a high-quality, affordable, good-looking product, which I think is a great business model. But realistically, I think you'd have to put them in the category of producing rugged fashion pieces rather than serious dive watches. And given their shorter history, you also have to wonder, are they going to be around in 10 years from now, 20 years from now, if you still have the watch from Spinnaker and need to have it serviced? I mean, probably, but we don't really know that. They don't have that long of a track record or history. And if you're looking to buy a watch that'll last a lifetime, my money is on Squale to be the brand that'll still be there for you 20 years from now. And I think that peace of mind is worth money. And that's why I think the brand reputation does contribute to the value of the watch. So I think it's clear at this point that the Squale is a significantly better watch than the Spinnaker. And perhaps after watching this video, you're getting the impression that maybe I don't like affordable watches. Now, whether you think it's a better value to spend $300 on a watch versus $1,500 on a watch, that's opening a pretty big can of worms that a lot of watch collectors are going to argue over. I don't think there's really a correct answer here, but I'll give you my opinion. I still think it's kind of ridiculous to spend $1,500 on a watch. I definitely appreciate everything that goes into a watch in that price range. I definitely think that a $1,500 watch is better than a $300 watch. I'd even go so far as to say I would rather have the $1,500 watch than the $300 watch. But would I pay $1,500 for a watch? Personally, no, I don't think I would. I'm really lucky to have this one because it was given to me to review here on the channel. And the same is true for the Spinnaker. Both of these watches were watches that I was given to do reviews on. But all that said, I find it very difficult for me personally to justify spending that much money on a watch. And again, that's just me. I think my ideal price range is to get a kind of core collection of watches in the sub $500 range, and then maybe one or two that are between $500 and $1,000, and have a nice selection of high quality watches that I'm not afraid to wear. But on the other hand, if I wanted to have just like one good watch, then I could see a lot more justification spending this much money on a single watch that I'm going to keep for the rest of my life. But really, that decision is going to vary wildly from person to person and situation to situation. All right, we've covered a lot of ground today, and hopefully that helps you guys think through a little bit more when you're considering whether you want to save up for a watch or whether you just want to get a more affordable watch that looks good, that has a decent amount of specs. As I've said, I really like both of these watches, and I think they're both good examples at their price ranges. If your budget is $300, I think the Spinnaker is a great choice. And if you have $1,500 to spend on a watch, I think the Squale has a lot to offer. But that'll wrap it up for today. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.